Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us here today for the Pennsylvania Policy Center's monthly Policy Action Zoom meeting. It's a time when we get together folks from all over Pennsylvania to educate them about some of the policies that are being talked about, policies that could either harm or hurt Pennsylvanians, and opportunities people have to take action to advance the kind of policies that will allow everyone in the state to thrive, not just survive. We're really excited today to be talking about some of the things that are happening right now in the federal government, and we're pleased to have with us Congressman Brendan Boyle. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Mark Steer, to do our introduction. Mark?
Thanks, Jeff. It's my great pleasure to introduce Congressman Brendan Boyle, who represents the 2nd Congressional District in the House of Representatives, where he served since 2014. Before that, he was a member of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. He reminded me as he got on that we've known each other for 20 years. And I should say that during those 20 years, he's been a great champion of the issues that Penn policy and I personally care about the most. One sign of the esteem in which he's held in Washington is that in a short period of time, he's risen to critical committee positions in the House of Representatives. He serves on the Ways and Means Committee, which is the committee that writes our tax legislation and controls Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security. And he is also the ranking member, that is the leading Democratic member of the Budget Committee. Now, that's the committee where the reconciliation bill that may include cuts to Medicaid and SNAP to pay for the extension and expansion of the Trump tax cuts will be considered. Given that we are leading a fight back campaign against those proposals, it's really great to have Congressman Boyle with us. I'll just mention one more thing. He's also was the leader of the Oreo boycott when Nabisco left Northeast PA, and I appreciate him doing that for lots of reasons. So, Congressman Boyle, the floor is all yours.
Yeah, thank you, Mark, for everything that you do, and thank you, Jeff, as well, and all of you who could be on here. I'm here in my office in Washington, D.C., as we have session today, just a return from the House floor voting. Obviously, life is about to change pretty abruptly here in just a few days. But first, a brief word about Mark Steer. I did first meet him exactly 20 years ago when I was first running for state representative, attempting to win a very Republican district, indeed a district that this past election Donald Trump won by double digits. And I wasn't successful my first time out or second time out, but the third time was the charm, and I ended up being the only Democrat to ever win that state house district, which I held for 3 terms before being elected to Congress in 2014. And as Mark mentioned, I have the honor now of leading my Democratic colleagues on the Budget Committee. You may recall about a dozen years ago, it was the same committee that my predecessor on the other side of the aisle, Paul Ryan, used this same exact position as his perch to advocate for the privatization of Medicare through vouchers, the essentially dismantling of Social Security as we know it, and many other sort of Ayn Rand wish list fever dreams. I model myself kind of as the exact opposite of Paul Ryan on the Democratic side of the aisle, attempting to use the same position and hopefully the same intellectual firepower, but to defend the essence of the New Deal, which in many ways began the modern era of building the American middle class. Social Security has been the single most successful anti-poverty program in American history. Before its creation, 46% of seniors retired into poverty. Today, that figure is in the low single digits. Actually, the lowest poverty rate among all different age cohorts. Now, I will quote that great famous philosopher Yogi Berra, who once said, it's deja vu all over again. And that is the case because at this moment, 8 years ago, we were days away from an incoming President Donald Trump with full control of Congress, a Republican House and a Republican Senate. And even though Donald Trump, he likes to cosplay working man, working class hero, populist, what was their number one agenda item in 2017? It was to attempt to repeal the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. to take away health care from tens of millions of Americans. Fortunately, we were able to win that battle, and the Affordable Care Act is still alive and well, has more enrollees than ever before, and has a higher popularity rating, over 60%, the highest that it's ever had. After that failed attempt, though, what was then the #1 priority for House Republicans, Senate Republicans, and Donald Trump? His so-called Tax Cut and Jobs Act, the TCJA. 83% of that tax cut went to the richest 1%. I want to say that again, and these aren't my figures. The Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office estimate showed 83% of the money would go to the richest 1% of Americans. That cost also, by the way, $2 trillion. That was added to our deficit and to our debt. So here we are. When I say it's deja vu all over again, Donald Trump is coming in with a Republican-controlled House, a Republican-controlled Senate. And in this campaign, he talked even more so like a working-class hero. Republicans, I keep reading the press, are supposedly the party of the working class now. And what is their #1 agenda item? It is extending the TCJA, only this time, instead of $2 trillion in cost, it would be $4.5 trillion. Last time, 83% of the benefit went to the top 1% of Americans. It is estimated the figure now would be even higher than 83% of the money going to the top 1%. Indeed, just look at the people who Donald Trump has decided to populate his cabinet with. Billionaire after billionaire. At this point, if you're a billionaire and if you're not in the Trump cabinet, there might be something wrong with you. Maybe you have a conscience or an IQ. Nonetheless, this is going to be the battle really of 2025. And I will say there's reason for optimism. And this is where actually the analogy differs from today versus 2017. In 2017, people forget the House of Representatives was actually not that close. Republicans had a majority of 241 to 194. That's a 47-member Republican majority. Today, it is 219 to 215. And on January 20th, it is quite possible that you will see 2 House Republicans resign. One, Mike Walls, will join the National Security Council. Another, Elise Stefanik, will resign either on the 20th or shortly thereafter, once she is presumably voted in as the next U.S. ambassador to the UN. So that would drop House Republicans for several months to a 217 to 215 majority, meaning they would have no margin for error. Literally every single Republican would have to vote with the Republicans in order to pass anything. So I think that we actually have a real shot of defeating the extension of the TCJA, of defeating some of their proposed pay-fors. As you know, there's this terrible inside Capitol Hill lingo, terms that many of you who are politically and policy sophisticated may understand, but a lot of my constituents don't necessarily. Some of the pay-fors, one of those awful terms, the pay-fors they're talking about is devastating Medicaid. The pay-fors they're talking about, and the House Freedom Caucus has released repeatedly on an annual basis, raising the retirement age for Social Security to 70. Some of the pay-fors include clawing back hundreds of billions of dollars that the Biden administration devoted toward relief on student debt. There is a lot along those lines, all of which would have devastating impact on our constituents in Pennsylvania, and especially in a district like mine, which is populated largely by working class Americans, people who work hard every day just to get by. And there is no question that they, more than anyone else, would bear the brunt of this agenda, almost all of which is designed to benefit the richest 1% of Americans, as well as corporate America. So with that, I can pause there because I really do want to maximize time for Q&A, but I applaud the work that all of you do you played a very, Mark, I know you personally, but many of you played a key role in that fight 8 years ago to save the ACA. I think the education that we were able to do nationwide was a critical part of making sure that by one vote was able to survive in the Senate. I think that that is a model for this time and place in 2025 and would help us greatly to be successful in this effort. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Congressman Boyle. If folks want to put their questions in the chat, I will read some of them. I have one or two questions that we got in advance that I just wanted to start with. First, do you have any sense of the timeline? I know it's gonna, for the reasons you mentioned, it's going to take a while for the Republicans to get their act together, and obviously we're hoping that there's going to be some delay so we can maximize the education we do before the reconciliation bill comes out of your committee, if it does come out. Do you have any sense of is there going to be one bill, two bills? Do you know when the tax cuts?
Yeah. So first, by way of background, for those who might not be aware, and this is maybe a bit of a refresher because we went through this 4 years ago for very different purposes, when a lot of us on the Democratic side of the aisle were attempting to use and ultimately successfully used reconciliation to pass a number of pieces of our agenda, ultimately culminating in something that was called the Inflation Reduction Act. That started out as a bigger bill called Build Back Better, and it was the reconciliation process that we used. Now, why do you use reconciliation? By the way, a process that grew out of the Budget Act, the Budget and Impoundment Control Act of 1974, which dictates the entire budget process. That's what created the Congressional Budget Office. It created the modern budget process. It created the House Budget Committee, the Senate Budget Committee. So a lot of this is based off that 1974 Act, including reconciliation. Reconciliation is a way to get around the filibuster in the United States Senate. It means you can pass something with 51 votes as opposed to 60 votes. However, there are all of these, in my view, antiquated and rather kooky rules in the Senate that basically dictates whether or not something qualifies for reconciliation. Some things do and some things don't. Ultimately, it's a rather anonymous figure known as the Senate parliamentarian who, 99.9% of Americans couldn't even name, but it is the Senate parliamentarian that will come down with rulings on what things qualify and what things don't qualify. She ruled against us, by the way, 4 years ago on a couple of critical items, including a minimum wage increase, which would have been in that bill, but the Senate parliamentarian ruled that it didn't qualify for reconciliation. Now, what starts that process before you can even get into the Senate? You have to pass reconciliation first with the House Budget Committee, where, as we mentioned, I'm ranking member. The agenda that House Republicans have talked about and just leaked to the press a couple days ago was the first week of February, so just a few weeks from now. That is their goal. I'm paint me skeptical that they will be able to meet that. They have some real internal fights. What do they do on the SALT issue? And I can get into that if people are interested. By the way, an issue that has somewhat of an impact certainly in Philadelphia and suburban Philadelphia, where we have great school districts. If you're among some places in Montgomery County and Bucks and Chester and Delaware County, even for just a middle class house, you are paying quite a robust figure in terms of property taxes to pay for that public education. So the SALT issue does affect a number of people in Pennsylvania, especially in southeastern Pennsylvania. They need to figure out what they're going to do on the SALT cap to get anywhere close to the votes that they need. What do they do with the Freedom Caucus? These are the most extreme members of the House Republican Conference. They have a bunch who have never voted to raise the debt limit. Donald Trump has said they need and want to include a debt limit increase in this reconciliation bill. But as I mentioned, they have a number of Freedom Caucus members who have never voted for it. How do they massage that? And those are just two of a number of issues that would have to be resolved really by that first week of February. So I do think that we have time to educate people because I would be quite, it's not impossible, but I would be very surprised if their stated timeline pans out.
Great, thanks. That's very helpful. I'm going to combine a couple of questions. We've got a couple of questions on Medicaid, and people want to know what your thoughts on block grants, per capita caps, and work requirements. And a recent memo that saying the administration does not have the authority to approve work requirements on its own.
So a few thoughts on this. First, one of the great myths, well, there are several great myths that Republicans like to always tell. One is that tax cuts pay for themselves, which of course has never been true, whether it was Reagan in the early 80s, who quadrupled the national debt, taking it from 1 trillion to 4 trillion. Again, that history repeated itself in 2001 and 2003 with the George W. Bush tax cuts, and then fast forward to 2017 with the Trump tax cuts. Cumulatively, it came out during hearings that we held in the Budget Committee over the last 2 years, and this came out because I was the one asking the question of a number of experts. I asked them, hey, don't even go back to the early 80s, just the last 20 years. Take the George W. Bush 2 big rounds of tax cuts, their extension a decade later, the Trump tax cuts. Don't include Iraq, don't include Afghanistan, just on tax cuts in the last 20 years. How much revenue are we missing? Because at that point, we had a debt of 34 trillion. It's a little higher now. The expert replied, having done the math, more than $10 trillion of our national debt, almost a third of it, comes from the missing tax revenue that we would have had without those George W. Bush tax cuts and Donald Trump tax cuts. So no, tax cuts don't spend for themselves. That's one of those myths. And I repeat this because you will be hearing that a lot over the next several weeks and months. Another myth that they like to spread, and you've heard this from Elon Musk and his little buddy, Robin to his Batman, apparently, Vivek Ramaswamy. They're going to magically find trillions of dollars of waste, fraud, and abuse in the government. They don't need to touch Social Security or Medicare or defense or veteran spending. They're going to find the money elsewhere. Well, guess what? If you don't touch Social Security and you don't touch Medicare and you don't touch defense and you don't touch veterans, you put those 4 off the table and you look for cuts elsewhere, but you want to balance the budget, you would have to cut 100% of everything else. And even then, you would still not actually achieve a balanced budget. You would have to cut 100%, 107% of everything else that is remaining, which of course is mathematically impossible. So the reality is, given that, and given they don't want to go after Social Security, and they don't want to go after Medicare, and they don't want to go after defense and veterans, the one big pocket they can go toward that they believe they can get away with politically, apparently, is Medicaid. I think Medicaid is very vulnerable at this moment. We have been, as many of you know, able to extend health insurance to a lot of Americans through that Medicaid expansion, which originally was part of the Affordable Care Act. I think that is threatened. I think that the possibility of seeing work requirements, even though the overwhelming majority of people on Medicaid are the working poor, they are people who work 40 hours a week at least, but their employer doesn't provide health insurance. That's what your person on Medicaid who benefited from Medicaid expansion, looks like the worker at Walmart who makes, not a great deal of money, but makes too much in order to qualify for traditional Medicaid. You look at all the money from Medicaid that goes to nursing homes in Pennsylvania and elsewhere. I think that money is really vulnerable. So I am quite concerned about the fight to preserve Medicaid as we know it. I think it is hugely vulnerable. I think that, the block grant issue, this is going back almost to the Newt Gingrich era, and that's been a pretty consistent Republican approach. which is a de facto way to cut these programs, just, dressed up in a different way. I do think that this is going to be a major fight ahead of us.
Thank you. There was another question about is SNAP threatened as well?
Yes, yes. I think I've seen that even in print. Certainly it's been talked about, but I do think that SNAP, food stamps, I think these things are hugely vulnerable. One of the proposed cuts that I saw reported, this was just in the last week, and I can't, it might be Punchbowl or Politico. It's one of the publications that actively follows things on the Hill, mentioned something like a 40 to 50% cut. I mean, a pretty sizable one that is being talked about among the more conservative elements of the House Republicans.
I think we should probably make it clear that if there are these sizable cuts, the state cannot make up the difference. It just doesn't have the resources. Is that correct?
Legal, so it gets into the weeds and it depends on the state as well. The bottom line, though, the scale of cuts we're talking about, practically speaking, there is no way that a state, even if it wanted to, I think, would be able to make up some of these cuts.
A continuing theme in a lot of these questions is what can we do? What can we do? What should we be doing to stop these cuts in vital social programs and to stop the extension and expansion of the Trump tax cuts?
Someone helpfully immediately found the article. Thank you, Dwayne. The cuts that I was just talking about. Yeah, so it was in Politico, and he just posted the article. So please take a look at that. In terms of what we can do, exactly what we're doing now on this Zoom, getting educated as this issue, but also spreading the word. Spreading the word and getting people activated absolutely saved the Affordable Care Act. That would not have happened. Everyone remembers John McCain's famous thumbs down. There were a couple other Senate Republicans who had to vote no as well. I think it was Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins. I don't think they would have necessarily voted no had it not been for the enormous public pressure. By the time the votes took place in the Senate that summer, the idea, it was amazing. Coming into 2017, the Affordable Care Act had actually never hit 50% approval in the polls. Once there was, once there was the Trump Republican effort to take away the Affordable Care Act, and people started to learn about all that it does and get activated on this issue, the poll numbers exactly flipped, so that a solid majority of Americans supported the Affordable Care Act and supported the idea that we should keep it and oppose the efforts to strip it away. That made the critical difference. I think here, really, that is the model, that making sure that we get active, that we get loud, and that we spread the word. I mean, a lot of people after a long campaign they want to check out. Certainly if they're on our side of the aisle, they're understandably dejected and really don't want to think about politics at this moment. But we don't have that luxury. There are devastating cuts ahead that could take place, and if we don't get active, I fear will take place.
Thanks. Obviously, we have a number of objectives here. One is to try to stop this from happening. If we can't do that, make it much less bad. If we can't do all of that, make it very unpopular, so that people understand going to the future elections who's responsible for tax cuts for the wealthy and who's responsible for cutting Medicaid and SNAP. But one other thing we might, some of us are thinking might be achievable if a bill actually gets done. In 2017, we got an expansion of the child tax credit through added to the reconciliation bill and ultimately out of the Congress. Is there any talk about doing something like that this year as well?
Yeah, I think I would say that I'm cautiously optimistic that this is an area where we could have a real bipartisan win. Last year in the House of Representatives, we passed by a large margin a bill that I voted for And actually, my district in Philadelphia would have benefited from it more than any other, according to the statistics. An expansion of the child tax credit. And interestingly, the House Republican chair of the Ways and Means Committee was the person who put the bill together with a lot of Democratic input. Now, we had to give up some things that were not necessarily what we would have chosen, but it was a genuine compromise. Unfortunately, the Senate Republicans blocked it, even though I think it had majority approval in the Senate, but the Republican chair of the committee, the Finance Committee, was opposed and it died. There is a real genuine effort to resuscitate that and make an expansion of the child tax credit on a permanent basis a part of this overall deal in some shape or form. So I do have, as I said, some cautious optimism when it comes to that issue. I thought one of the most important things that we did 4 years ago, once President Biden took office, was the 1-year expansion of the child tax credit. It will always be my great regret that even though we passed the permanent expansion of that in the House, that two, neither of them are Democrats now, but two at the time Democratic senators blocked us from making that permanent. That 1 year it took effect, there was an almost 50% reduction of child poverty in the United States of America. And that's what we should be about.
Thank you. I know you have a hard stop, and I don't want to keep you beyond the time you committed to us. So I just want to thank you, Congressman Boyle, for being here, because as you said, education is critical, and the people in this room are the people who have to go out and educate their friends and family and people in their communities about the need to stop this bad legislation being proposed by the Republicans. I hope you understand we are your allies. We believe you're our ally, and we're going to try to work together as much as possible over the next couple of months to achieve these goals. So
Well,
thanks.
that is great to hear, and I thank you, Mark, again. So appreciative for what you do, Jeff, and Jeff. Thank you to you both as well, and let's continue to be in active touch, because as depressing as November may have been, this is not the time to give up. This is a time, in fact, to redouble our efforts. And the good news is the House of Representatives, as I mentioned, is so agonizingly close. We have a real chance to block a lot of bad things from happening. So I look forward to working together in order to stop bad things from happening and then build the momentum so that in a brief period from now, believe it or not, in only about 20 months or so from now, we can win back the House, and then we can be talking about proactively making good things happen. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Take care. I'm going to turn it back to Jeff in a second, but there was one question in the chat, and that I could answer. Someone asked, how many people in Pennsylvania are on Medicaid? At any one time, it's about 4 million of the 12 million people in the state, but most people are on Medicaid for only a year or 2 or 3. Over the course of our lifetimes, almost 60 to 65% of people in this country will be on Medicaid at one point or another, either as children, as adults, or as seniors getting care in nursing homes. And having answered that question, and I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of your questions, but there were a lot of them, I'm going to turn it back to Jeff for the next part of the event.
Thank you so much, Mark. And again, thank you to Congressman Boyle. And thank you to all of you for joining us and for these great questions. We're not finished. We have some more information and some opportunities for folks to take action. But I did want to make sure that we let folks know that the questions that you submitted that we were not able to get to, Congressman Boyle's staff have said we can send those over to them. They will actually give the contact info as well for folks who want to follow up with the Congressman's office. And we'll be sending that out with follow-up materials to everyone who registered for this. But we did want to let you know we'll pass those along to the Congressman's office as well. We did have a lot of questions about Medicaid, and we had questions as well about some of the programs that provide food and other vital necessities to people across Pennsylvania. And as Mark just pointed out, Medicaid alone reaches a huge number of people. We really want people to understand, because there's a lot of information out there that is clearly not accurate. We want you to hear directly from experts who work in the field every day, serving communities and people who benefit from and whose lives are empowered and expanded because of these kinds of programs and services. So we're really pleased to have two fantastic guests with us here today. I'm going to introduce both of them now. Just to let you know, I did put in the chat, and we mentioned a few times there in the chat that we have all the lines muted because we had, I think, 200 people registered for this. So when you chat, you can send questions to me, and I will be posing those questions to our two guests as well. We're going to hear from a couple of our PA Policy Center colleagues about things you can do to take action before we even leave this meeting today. So again, submit questions in the chat. I'm going to put some information here about our guests, and I'm going to introduce them to you now. We're going to hear from them in the order that I'm introducing them. First, we're going to hear from Stuart Haniff. He is the Executive Director at Hunger Free Pennsylvania. Hunger Free Pennsylvania is Pennsylvania's single largest nonprofit provider of food resources and meals to older Pennsylvanians and hungry families, working in partnership with state and federal governments and nonprofit organizations. We're really pleased to have Stuart with us here today and for the tremendous work he does every day. We also have with us Jeff Eisman, who is the Public Policy and Outreach Coordinator at the Pennsylvania State Independent Living Council, PA-SILC. PA-SILC is a nonprofit cross-disability consumer-controlled organization that uses collective power and legal mandate to advance public policies that ensure civil rights and expand options for all people with disabilities in all aspects of life. I would like you to join me in welcoming both Stuart and Jeff. Stuart?
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for having me today. It's an honor and a privilege to be able to meet with all of you and share a little bit about Hunger Free Pennsylvania. I'm going to start off by saying, to echo the comments at the beginning of this meeting, that one of the main focus of this group and this organization is so that individuals in our state don't simply just survive, but that they thrive. I bring that up because the state of food security, and rather food insecurity here in Pennsylvania, is really at a critical crossroads. Food security and food insecurity, more importantly, for those of you that don't know, is defined as consistent, reliable access to healthy, nutritious foods. And as Jeff shared, Hunger Free Pennsylvania is the state's largest nonprofit provider of food resources for hungry families, and we are one of the Commonwealth's leading advocates in the fight against hunger. We're in our 40th year, and our network of food bank now spans 18 across all 67 counties. Some numbers to kind of frame our discussion. In the state of Pennsylvania, more than 1.2 million individuals do not know where their next meal is coming from every single day. Perhaps even more heartbreaking, 325,000 of them, more than that in fact, are children. And as a result of rising food prices and increased demands, lots of people are really surprised to hear that those are creating a strain on our state's charitable food network. Hunger Free Pennsylvania, simply stated, is the state's safety net against food insecurity. Many food banks, in fact, now are facing utilization rates that rival those set during the peak periods of COVID-19. In fact, November of 24, just 2 months ago, a month and a half ago, we saw the third highest total of pounds distributed since the pandemic began in March of 2020. That's a staggering statistic to share with people, and many people are surprised. In the calendar year 2024 that just finished, our Pennsylvania network of food banks distributed 273 million pounds of food. 273 million pounds of food, and that went to over 3,500,000 households. So you see the impact of the charitable food system and what we're doing. There are a number of programs within the state. Simply stated, I always say that we're never going to simply feed our way out of hunger. And I bring that up because a hit or a devastating impact on the charitable food network has a trickle-down and domino effect to all kinds of other aspects of the world we live in. One of the things that we've heard about is potential cuts, especially to SNAP. I know that we talked about that. These changes and these cuts would actually cut food assistance across the US. and it would make it even harder for millions of people to buy the groceries they need to enjoy and sustain a healthy diet. Hunger Free Pennsylvania oversees, as the state administrator, the CSFP, or Senior Food Box Program. We have over 39,000 seniors that are currently receiving food every single month. My background is in healthcare and food banking, and the intersection of hunger and health is really critical, especially for our most vulnerable population, our seniors, because malnutrition, unfortunately, leads to increased costs, and more importantly, malnutrition leads to higher outcomes of health-related incidents. SNAP is our most effective and important tool to fight hunger. SNAP reaches over 40 million children, parents, older adults, disabled people, workers, and low-income poor people every month. As Jeff mentioned, many of whom are working poor. They work, they have 40-hour-a-week jobs, but they simply can't make ends meet. And that reflects about 1 in 8 people and 1 in 5 children. As of September of last year, SNAP provided more than 367 million in federally funded food assistance to over 2 million people. I bring up the numbers because the numbers don't tell the whole story, but they tell a big part of the story. Because if these numbers decrease, the impact and the support of our most vulnerable decreases and poses health risks, economic challenges. Research, in fact, shows SNAP reduces food insecurity and is linked not just to improved health, but education and economic outcomes. And importantly, it lowers medical costs for participants. It also supports workers in low-paid jobs and has that ripple domino effect in the economy overall and individual communities, as SNAP benefits are redeemed in stores all across the US. So just to kind of conclude in the way that I started, we're never going to simply feed our way out of hunger, but an impact that hunger has in our lives, and more importantly, the charitable food system is able to address, a cut in that impact and a reduction in those resources does more than address and challenge food insecurity, challenge the very fabric of those who are most vulnerable in our state.
Thank you so much, Stuart, for all this information. It's really a huge challenge facing Pennsylvania, and we're really glad to have you and your colleagues and others across the state combating hunger in Pennsylvania. We have a couple questions that are coming in. If folks do have questions, they can submit them to me via the chat. There's questions about SNAP and also related to Medicaid. We'll take those in just a moment, but I do want to go to our other guest, Jeff Eisman from PA Silk. Jeff, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. I'll just mention a little bit about the PA Silk. We work primarily, but not exclusively, with the 16 Centers for Independent Living in Pennsylvania, also known as CILS. We love acronyms like every other movement. We also work with a lot of other disability organizations, like some of the ARC chapters that serve people with intellectual disabilities and autism, sometimes community mental health and other groups on various issues. So Pennsylvania has about 1.8 million people with disabilities, according to the latest U.S. Census numbers, out of a little over 13 million. Mark mentioned a number of folks generally on and off of Medicaid. It's about a little over 3 million currently, I believe. Of that population, you have people with physical disabilities and seniors on Medicaid getting what's called home and community-based services. One of the challenges is our Medicare and Medicaid system, when it was set up in the 1960s, was biased in terms of institutional care, like nursing homes, state hospitals, intermediate care facilities, and that nature. And while our state has been doing what's been called rebalancing, it's shifting people out who choose to be living in the community. We're still not there yet. And because the entitlement is institutional or nursing home, those programs usually get funded first. So the cuts that you would see on Medicaid, if you're living in a community with a physical disability, an intellectual disability, maybe even community mental health programs, that's where the cuts would go first, unless there is some directive by the state. But even if there's not, you're still going to have fewer dollars, as the congressman mentioned, to use. So, but we still haven't gotten a total shift in terms of starting people going to the community first instead of an institution. So that's part of the problem. I mean, we have people on community mental health and health choices. Most of you have probably heard of that in Pennsylvania. We have people with physical disabilities using community health or community health choices and the OBRA waivers, physical disabilities. And with intellectual disabilities, you have various waivers there, the autism waiver, the person's family directed services, and others. So community-based care is more of a focus for a lot of ours. Is what we believe in. We also still have a waiting list of for people with intellectual disabilities in Pennsylvania, which has not been completely addressed. So any Medicaid cuts would impact that population as well. I would also mention the Children's Health Insurance Program, or CHIP, and we do have some kids with disabilities on that program, which has different tiers in it. I won't go into that, but and you also have folks using the health exchange. I would say most don't have disabilities, but some may have chronic conditions. So those are potentially programs that are potentially impacted. Vocational rehabilitation and the Department of Labor and Industry, the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, also known as OVR, almost 80% of their main funding is federal dollars. And currently they're already on what's called a waiting list or order of selection because of a reductions in federal dollars. Basically, Pennsylvania's been very good at getting funds that other states don't claim, and those funds weren't there to claim this time. But any cuts on the federal level is going to impact how many people with disabilities are served in terms of employment. And as we mentioned in a lot of our meetings, people are working, they're paying taxes. So it's helpful to the economy as well as just what people want to do and live. SNAP was mentioned earlier. A number of people with disabilities, significant number use the SNAP program. They use food banks to supplement their incomes. I can tell you from working in community mental health years ago, I would take people to the food bank and food pantry, and I still do it part-time working in community mental health. And I know monthly the programs do that. So SNAP's another one. Social Security was mentioned, SSI, SSDI. You also have a 1 to 2 year waiting period if you acquire disability. So in that time, your resources are very limited if you're not working. So that's huge. I'm happy to take any questions on anything as far as any of the programs I mentioned or anything else related to disabilities. And I think also education was mentioned. Some of the federal dollars, particularly for special education, they're very important. And of course, those add into the state dollars, which of course we've all seen the education ruling by our state courts on funding, which would also include funding education for students with disabilities. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jeff. And thank you, Stuart, as well. I really appreciate the depth of knowledge that you've brought to this conversation. And you've sparked a number of questions. I'm going to get to the ones that I've received so far. We don't have a whole lot of time left. We will wrap up before 2, but if folks have a couple questions they'd like to get in here at the end, get them to me right now. First one comes from Diane. This is for you, Jeff. Regarding block grants, per capita grants, reduced FMAP, et cetera, can you speak to the impact on home and community-based services? As I understand, they're a particular risk since they are optional in the state plan. What are the plans for advocacy?
So, yeah, that's something I won't name the groups, but some of us that work with various groups there has been some advocacy or plans to start that. So just to protect, and I think it's been more of a across the board protection, but some of us that are more in the community-based space tend to focus on those issues. But yeah, you have community, the potential block granting is a problem just because Medicare and Medicaid there's the institutional entitlement. So unless you have a governor and a legislature that really believes in the community, and the community does save money. However, people look at what they have to do a lot of times rather than options. So, but that's there actually is one other thing I forgot to mention is housing with HUD and USDA Rural Development. With some of those programs too, federal cuts would impact people with disabilities to use those too. Thanks.
Thanks for the question, Diane. Thanks for answering that, Jeff. Question now for Stuart from Matt. Sorry. What does talking about Project 2025, which was the agenda that kind of came out of what they are planning to do in Congress. What does Project 2025 and/or the Trump administration propose that worries you the most about food and food supplies?
Thank you for the question, Matt. That's a great question. And I think that what we've seen the last few years, and a somewhat new resident to Pennsylvania myself, I say we now, since I've been here for more than half of a year, is that many of our state food programs and government food programs have been flat funded. Now, contrast that with the increasing demand and probably equally or more important, the rising cost of food. As you can imagine, flat funding is actually less funding because the demand is growing, but the funds stay the same. So what concerns myself, our organization, and our network the most is that we are strained now to have the capacity, the capabilities, the resources to meet the need of food insecurity for those 1.2 million Pennsylvanians that don't know where their next meal is coming from. A further cut to that and a disruption of our programs financially and capacity-wise would mean less and less and less resources and more people that have to wonder where their next meal is coming from, especially, as I said earlier, even sadder children who have to face the tragedy of going to bed hungry. So a diminishing amount of resources means less of a capability and capacity to meet the need. And what worries me the most is what's going to happen to those people that have to go without.
Thank you so much for answering that, Stuart. And it really is kind of shocking and scary to think about what would happen if they actually were able to get some of these things through. We are going to be fighting back against that, obviously. We know you are. Folks on the line here will have an opportunity to take action in just a moment. We do have one more question here. This is a question for Stuart. Question is from Freda. Students in public schools receive free breakfast and lunch. What about students in charter schools and online and homeschooled?
At this point, we want to make sure that we expand access so that all of our children have access to universal meals, breakfast. And that certainly is a big priority. And going back to the previous question about what concerns us is that those types of initiatives that are reaching people will reach less people. So universal breakfast for all means universal breakfast for all. We want to make sure that we don't distinguish or differentiate between public schools, charter schools, but there are challenges, and the biggest challenge is funding.
Thank you for the question, Freda, and thanks for explaining that, Stuart. And I think that's obviously a goal we all get behind, is the idea that all of Pennsylvania's children should be fed. Thank you to Stuart. Thank you to Jeff. Thank you to Hunger Free PA. Thank you to PA Silk for making the time and bringing your expertise here to us. I am putting contact information, titles, and organizational websites for both Stuart and Jeff in the chat there. If folks would like to visit their websites, follow up with them and get more engaged, you can do that there online. Speaking of online, these policy action meetings we host every third Thursday. Today is the third Thursday of January. We will be back next month. That will be February 20th. We're going to have some information here for folks who would like to register for that in advance. Every third Thursday at 1 p.m. we get on for 45 minutes, no more than an hour, to really take a deep dive into these issues. And we bring on some great folks who just have so much information and so much passion to offer. And we're really glad to have that opportunity. Stuart?
Quick plug, if I may. For those of you, because I know we have a vast and diverse audience, please encourage you to follow us on our social media channels on Facebook, Hunger Free Pennsylvania. Please follow us for the most up-to-date information, especially during this critical time.
Thanks, Stuart. Yeah, we all should be informed and staying up to date, so we will encourage folks to do that. We do try to wrap up these meetings, though, with an opportunity for folks to take action, because a lot of times we hear about the challenges. We hear about the things that keep Stuart worried at night about what might happen with food assistance in Pennsylvania, things that Jeff goes above and beyond the call of duty to help the people that he serves and that his organization serves. We know it's important for folks to have an opportunity to take action. and to fight back against some of these attacks on these vital programs. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dwayne Heisler, who is our campaign director here, talk a little bit about how you can take action today and encourage others to do the same. Dwayne?
Thank you, Jeff. Hello, everyone. As we heard from Congressman Boyle at the top of this hour, when Mark asked the question, what can we do? How can we fight back? He had a very interesting question. It was about educating ourselves and those people in our community about getting the word out, getting the messaging, having the narrative on the ground about how important these programs are. So I just dropped in the chat a petition where you can sign personally and also an organizational sign-on. So if you're a part of an organization that would like to join the fight, please share those links and fill out those links. Also, I'm going to drop in some events that we have coming up. We've already completed a few. We were out of the gate pretty quickly after the holidays doing an event up in Northeast Pennsylvania. There's an event where we'll have some speakers at the Philadelphia Neighborhood Network meeting, which is on January 25th in Philadelphia. And then we have a community conversation that's going to be happening in South Bethlehem. And when I posted this earlier, I already got a message from someone who wants to participate, which is great. If you sign that petition, you will automatically be on the list to get the details on that information. We will also be scheduling other events in other congressional districts regarding this. They'll be throughout the state. We are currently planning one in Pittsburgh, another one in Philadelphia is coming up too. And this will all be leading to a lobby day in DC. And you can certainly join us for that. We're going to be working with our national partners, so there will be people all over the country who are doing the same things that you're doing in making sure that we don't have these cuts to Medicaid and to SNAP just to have tax giveaways to billionaires and large corporations. That date has not yet been determined by our national partners, but they believe it will be in March and April. And once again, if you sign that petition, you'll be on the list there so that you can get the latest information and can encourage others to come. I'll also drop my contact information in the chat. If you'd like to join as a partner to help to coordinate these events, if you're interested in speaking at the events, one of the things we've been doing is collecting stories about people who are directly impacted, because that can have a huge impact on this fight. I'll put my contact information right in the chat, and you can reach out. Feel free to reach out to me personally, call, text, or send me an email, and I will get that to you. So, Jeff, I'm going to turn it over back to you. If there's any questions, happy to answer those. But please fill out that petition and be in touch and join us at these upcoming events.
Thanks so much, Dwayne. Yeah, there's a lot going on because there's a lot that needs to be done, and that's why we're reaching out to all of you. We can all play a role in fighting back against these attacks on vital programs. Dwayne's contact information is there in the chat if you'd like to follow up with him about participating in some of these things. It's a question, Dwayne, is there a deadline for the organizational sign-on letter?
Obviously, this fight is very timely that we heard from the congressman. And so if you really want to put your thumb on the scale, I would suggest getting it filled out as quickly as possible, because we just don't know what's going to happen as of next week, how quickly they're going to be able to get this together. Our hope, as Mark outlined, is that it might be spread out a little bit, so we'd have some time, but I would encourage you to get those organizational sign-ons as quickly as possible.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Dwayne. Yeah, and I think people will probably hear about it when we get to the point where we're doing a final roundup of organizations, but definitely sooner rather than later is always great. I put in the chat there and highlighted next month's Policy Action Zoom meeting, again, third Thursday, 1 p.m. Thursday, February 20th. The link is in the chat if you'd like to pre-register. Again, we encourage you to take action. Please feel free to reach out to me or any of my colleagues here at the Pennsylvania Policy Center. If you have any additional questions, we will pass along that information that I mentioned. The questions we didn't get to for the congressman, we'll be getting over to his office as well, along with contact info for follow-up on that if they're able to do so. Again, thank you so much to Congressman Boyle. Thank you to Stuart. Thank you to Jeff. Thank you to my colleagues here at the Pennsylvania Policy Center, our Executive Director, Mark Steer. Thank you to Dwayne Heisler, our campaign Director. Campaign, is that the title? I'm so sorry. Campaign director.
You got it,
and
Jeff.
there we go. And Adrienne Stanley, who is our digital comm staff person, who did all the great work keeping this Zoom meeting running for us. Thank you to the rest of the PA Policy Center team. Thank you to all of you. Again, keep in touch. Let's stay strong. We'll stand together and fight for the things that we all need.
Jeff,
Have a
can I
great
one last
Yeah,
thing?
sure.
Some of you
Yep.
represent organizations or members of organizations that hold meetings. If you have such an organization and would like someone from our organization or one of our partner organizations to come out and talk about the threat of federal tax cuts for the ultra rich and billionaires and corporations, or the threats to human service programs like Medicaid and SNAP, we'll be happy to send them to come up. We'll go any place, anytime, anywhere, virtually or in person. Thanks.
All right. Yeah, thanks. A good reminder there, folks. We can take the show on the road, or we can come to you virtually. So if you would like us to provide some folks or help you connect with some of other experts out there, we'll be happy to do that. Again, thanks to everybody. Have a great day. Stay strong. We'll see you next month. Take care.